Hollow Knight is a game that released in February of this year, 2017. It was met with critical acclaim, praising it as potentially Game of the Year, and an absolute masterpiece. While the hype has died down for the game, many fans and reviewers cherish it as a revolutionary installment of Metroidvania-style games. I picked up the game during the Steam Summer Sale, but I never completed it. While I did sink 22 hours into the game, I started to not have fun with it after about 10 to 12 hours in. And that baffled me, because I truly did, and still do, think that the game is good. I'm not here to bash the game or call it bad in any capacity. I'm here to try to piece together what went wrong. My first venture into Hollow Knight caused me to absolutely adore the game. The controls were fluid and felt tight. The visuals were beautifully done and constantly impressed me. The sounds were cute and fun, but also serious and ominous. I fell in love with everything about it. Every new area gave me that classic exploration feel, taking me back to my childhood days of playing Super Metroid all day. All that praise aside, some things obviously spurred me to create this video, and I'd like to talk about them a little more in depth. Pretty early on, the player is introduced to the concept of charms. Charms are the game's customizable equipment system, more or less. These charms have a variety of effects that range from allowing you to gather more money easier or modify your nail properties, to ones that affect your magic capabilities or change how you move. It was a pretty cool way of allowing you to run the game with multiple builds. Herein lies the first problem I had with Hollow Knight when I was playing it. By sacrificing your ability to collect more Geo, the game's currency, you would be effectively crippling yourself by mid-game with a lack of cash to spend on further upgrades. In most games that I play, I want to be the strongest melee fighter that I can possibly be. Something that hits hard and fast. It's just how I like to play games. So by choosing the charms that allowed me to do that, I forwent the Gathering Swarm and Fragile Greed charms that boosted my income. Now, this doesn't sound like something that should make a huge difference in the game, right? In my experience, it made my mid-game hell to try to get through. Things were kicking my ass and I was stuck wondering if I was just missing upgrades or not. Sure enough, there were many upgrades that could help me out, but at the price of an inordinate amount of Geo. By purchasing some notches and charms to help me get past areas and bosses that I had difficulties with, I would find myself unable to afford to pay for new luxuries such as new save benches and maps of the area. Not to mention the compass indicating your position on the map is also a charm in the game. What this means is that if you choose not to sacrifice one of your notches for Wayward Compass, the game leaves you in the total dark as to your location on the map, making exploration much more tedious. It's something I consider to be a bad move personally in a game that is all about exploration. Nobody wants to willingly give up their ability to see where they are on the map. While this decision isn't a game killer in and of itself, it's a decision that I personally disagree with. And if I wasn't spending all of my Geo on upgrading myself, I would lose it to death. When you die in Hollow Knight, you drop all of your hard-earned Geo a la Dark Souls. If you fail to retrieve it before dying again, you lose it permanently. And that really does hurt for people who aren't as good at the game. It leads me to my next and possibly most crucial point, the difficulty level. This game is hard. For many people, that's an awesome thing. Hell, I love a good challenge. But I only love a good challenge when I'm expecting it. When I dive into a new game, I try not to spoil myself as much as possible. And I was very pleased that I could enter a new area and not know what was going to be there. I know that I'm going to get crucified on this point, but the game was just too difficult for me. And that's okay, maybe it just wasn't for me. But I honestly think that maybe I just wasn't in the right mindset when I played through the game. When I started Hollow Knight, I was enamored by its cute graphics and funny little enemies. But it wasn't until many hours in that I realized how hard this game truly got. And it made me just not want to play it after a while. Constantly dying just trying to backtrack through area after area was just irritating. And fighting normal enemies that take a good 3 to 5 hits to kill was tedious. It really does bug me because I don't want to come off as someone who hates challenges or wants to cakewalk through a game. I adore the way older Metroidvanias were able to feel like a challenge. But not so much that they were a slog to get through. I consistently felt underpowered through my time spent in Hollow Nest. I'm aware that there are upgrades for your nail and charms to boost your damage output, but I always felt like it took me too long to fight every enemy on the way from point A to point B, even with a fair amount of upgrades. And choosing to avoid combat just to get to the next boss made it so that you would be short on Geo for your next upgrade. Speaking of bosses, I genuinely enjoyed the boss fights in Hollow Knight, at first. In the beginning, they felt rewarding and like a challenge to beat, which is cool. But as time goes on and the game becomes more difficult, it becomes more and more agitating to try to defeat bosses that take what feels to be a solid 50 to 60 hits to defeat. I'm all for challenges, but there's a point where I'm fumbling around on a particular boss for what feels like ages before it beats me into the ground or I finally manage to puncture its last bit of health. I feel like this could have been easily amended with something along the lines of a boss health bar, or at the very least a charm that allows you to see one. There were so many times when I'd be fighting and saying to myself, he has got to die soon, he just has to, which gets really bothersome after your 20th attempt at the damn thing. I am very aware that my argument boils down to, oh no, the game's too hard, boo-hoo. I get that. But here's my opinion on games that are intentionally super difficult. Difficulty in a game does not inherently make it a fun game. I know some people seek outrageously difficult games intentionally, and that's great. And while I wouldn't categorize this game as outrageously hard, Hollow Knight did have a lot of mechanics that didn't pair well with the amount of difficulty it brought to the table. When you combine the aspects of backtracking, money management, and a fluid but simple combat system, it's a recipe for something that's more frustrating to play than it is fun. And I realize that this is all my opinion, and a lot of people love the game, and that's fine. It really is. I'm not here to rip the game apart and proclaim my opinion as the end-all be-all. Take a game like Salt and Sanctuary. It's a game that really works for my comparisons in this scenario, and one that I thoroughly enjoyed playing through to completion, while exploring every little area that I could. And on top of that, the game is well known for its difficulty level. So when I say that I found Hollow Knight too difficult, it may be something else more than just me hating on difficult games. So why is this more fun to me than this? Part of my theory is that in a game like Salt and Sanctuary, you can choose from a variety of playstyles and excel at any of them, from sword and board and dual wielding to magic and big two-handers. It allows you to try a different style of fighting if one of them just isn't suiting the way you play. In Hollow Knight, the combat system is much simpler, which a lot of people would argue suits the game better. And I am inclined to agree with that assessment to an extent. While fighting is kept simple and gradually grows more complex as you unlock new abilities, I can never help but feel that there could have been more. I'm not saying the game should have had an arsenal of weapons to choose from, but I do think that it could have benefited from a combo system. A light attack and a heavy attack with a few simple combos would have been an awesome addition to make you feel like every battle could go differently than the last if you wanted it to. But as it stands, I generally did the same thing every time that I navigated from area to area, which was jump and mash the attack button. I personally enjoyed the Zelda-tude downward thrust attack the most when I was moving from place to place. It was at least a bit more fun to bounce around the areas that way rather than walking and attacking. To make things easier, I did eventually get the Great Slash nail art, but I actually abhorred using it. It felt so sluggish to use, and more often than not, there wouldn't be enough time before the game's hordes of fast enemies got to you. Dying to a boss seemed way more punishing because of the amount of distance between most of them and their respective benches. When you're as impatient as I am, you want to get back to the boss as soon as possible. And this causes me to want to rush as fast as I can to do so. I want to put the patterns that I've memorized into practice, and I want to do so immediately. I hate having to try to run through a gauntlet of mazes just to take another crack at a boss that inevitably I'm probably going to lose to, which I admit is because of my own low skill level. So to mitigate the amount of damage that I take on my way back to the boss, I have to slowly and carefully make sure to kill all the enemies on the way back to ensure that I don't take too many hits. I wanted to be able to backtrack efficiently throughout areas. And while I'm not saying that I don't believe that there should be stronger enemies in the game, I do think that when you've been through the same area multiple times, and you're backtracking through it, and you're struggling with the hordes of enemies, that to me personally is very annoying. I get that you're not supposed to get all the power at once, but I always just felt insignificant, and maybe that's just the point of the game and I'm missing it. I had previously stated that difficulty was possibly my most crucial point, and while I still stand by that statement, I believe that the simplicity is the thing that killed the difficulty the most for me. And maybe it truly is a skill problem for me, and I just genuinely sucked at the game. I will fully admit that if it's true. Maybe I'm impatient. I know I'm impatient. But I'm also not a stranger to old-school platformers, Metroidvanias, and any other game category that Hollow Knight could remotely be considered a part of. I grew up with games that defined these genres and loved every second of most of them. Even semi-newer releases like Shovel Knight and Ori and the Blind Forest are some of my absolute favorites. I had no issues with them and loved how difficult they were. But Hollow Knight always felt like I was struggling just to make it from area to area. Simplicity isn't a bad thing in games, but it gets very boring when you have to go back through the same areas repeatedly. In a tough platformer, you don't have to repeat the same stages and do a bunch of backtracking. I understand that this is a Metroidvania, and what they are is a bunch of backtracking. But all of my favorite ones had a much more complex and interesting combat to them. I can't recall a time where I had less fun backtracking in a game. And maybe that's a testament to how huge this game really is rather than the combat or anything else. Most of the time I did feel like I was just trying to get from one end of the map to the other, just so I could accomplish some petty task, and then hoof it back to the place where I came from. Don't get me wrong, there isn't anything wrong with the game's size. It's more the method of traveling between the various areas. Yes, there is a fast travel system, but it always feels like an absolute chore to try to get to the various stagways that are placed around the map. When you make a map that's as big in scope as Hollow Knight's, a fast travel system is definitely necessary. But the problem is that more often than not, I didn't even want to take the time to travel to the station itself. I always felt like they were really out of place and annoying to get to. I could deal with that if there were a larger quantity of stagways, or if there was a way to instantly travel to the closest one. But as it stands, it was absolute monotony to trek from one corner of the map to the nearest stagway, just so I could get off and trek to my destination. Hollow Knight is a good game. I don't know how many times I've said that throughout this video, but it is a good game. It's well polished and has a ton of areas, collectibles, upgrades, and it causes it to genuinely stand out as an excellent title in the Metroidvania genre. I will never tell anyone that this is a bad game or anything of the sort. But despite these assertions, I believe that there could have been some changes made to the game to make it better and more fun to play for someone as impatient and as bad as I am. A better economic system with less grinding for people who aren't as good at the game, health meters for bosses, a simplistic combo system, and a better fast travel could have easily turned this game into one of my favorites of all time. But it ultimately fell flat of that for me. I think Team Cherry did an amazing job with Hollow Knight. If they hadn't, then I wouldn't care enough to point out the issues that I personally had with the game. I'd still recommend it to anyone who wanted to scratch that Metroidvania itch, but with the stipulation that they take the game's few shortcomings into account.
What am I supposed to fucking do there? What am I supposed to do when he fucking dashes back and forth? There's fucking 9 goddamn enemies right above me. Oh yeah, fucking, you're supposed to just, you have the fucking reflexes of a goddamn tiger and, jump up and kill everything above you and then land on top of them with a fucking plunging attack. That's what you're supposed to do. Fuck you. Fuck you.